bonjour et bienvenue. Donc, le thème...
Good morning. So the topic now, next topic, is really crucial. If we want economy and life in society to fare well, this roundtable is entitled Institutions, Political Authorities, Businesses, Trust and Consent. And it's also meant to help economic growth. In order to discuss this topic, we are going to listen to Stefanie Stantcheva online. She's a professor at Harvard. She's in Boston. It's only 5 a.m. there, so she had to wake up very early. Thanks very much. We also have Fidel, who founded an observatory of environmental opinions. We have got Marion Darrieutort, presiding over a think tank named Entreprise Et Progrès, Companies and Progress, and Sylvain Rabuel, in charge of Domusvi, managing retirement houses, nursing homes, rather. I'm going to start with Stefanie. You are applying a method within the framework of the lab you did found. You conduct opinion surveys, online opinion surveys, focusing on the feelings and opinions of citizens vis-à-vis economic and political policies in order to better know how to do away with the obstacles, how to help these citizens precisely. And I'd like to know how you manage to do this, because it's a topic which has been quite neglected in the past, and you are real pioneers in this field, and like to you how you have been working. Thanks very much for being with us, with me, sorry, and I'm glad to be with you this morning on this topic named Trust and Consent. I'm going to discuss two recent research studies based on the work conducted at the social economic lab level. First approach, that's the approach just mentioned 2 minutes ago by Jean Tirole, and second research work dealing with climate policies in which trust plays a crucial role. What the vision named vision with null vision privileging, fostering the null vision. So a world in which some people contribute to society, but it's a vision in which we also have some other people who have a different behavior. So all resources and assets being in a limited quantity, this can lead to conflicts, to antagonism, exchanges being considered as competitive. That was the case, it is still the case in some regions where resources are limited and where soil is limited access. Is this vision, this approach, this null-sum approach prevailing or not? It is prevailing in some places, in some contexts where the conditions have totally changed. But this belief is still prevailing in many places, many countries, and has an impact on the socio-political side. So we can envisage a situation in which politicians do privilege access to resources with taxation by encouraging positive discrimination and by encouraging a restrictive migratory policy. It's usually linked to support to the left side of the political spectrum, but not necessary. I must say that more and more countries these days have a null-sum vision or approach, maybe due to the fact that there is a downturn in growth vis-à-vis the previous generations, and what you live and experience when you are young is really impacting the rest of your life. We also observe that men are more tempted to go for this null-sum vision, and that less privileged people are also more prone to this approach, to this vision. When people have been impacted by immigration, by the success of migratory people who have migrated in their people, they will less prone to this null-sum approach. I hope I have kind of encapsulated all these elements, showing that it's quite essential to help and change this vision by encouraging young generation to live in a different environment. Now, when it comes to support for new climate or positive climate policies, so to speak, and in a recent study conducted together with OECD and Harvard, we tried to understand what were the concerns of populations in terms of climate policies. By way of summary of this study, I would say that the concern for climate change is really widespread all over the world. Very few climate skeptical people, and most people do want a more far-reaching climate policy. Now, when it comes to deciding whether people are going to support or not the new policies, things are slightly different. Of course, they take on board the consequences for themselves, their household, etc. But they insist on the fact that the policy has to be efficient. Is it going to reduce CO2 emission? It's meant and understanding how a climate policy is going to reduce pollution, CO2 emission. It's not that easy for general populations, but policy is going to be more popular if it looks and sounds more even and fair, not weighing too much on households. The carbon tax it's not at all supported when it's considered as being regressive. It's much better supported when it goes together with some help to less privileged households, or when its revenues of this policy are dedicated to environmental initiatives. All this, of course, is kind of trust-related, and citizens most often do not trust political authorities and governments in this respect. And people do trust the political authorities, which reinvest money into green initiatives. So I mean that trust and consent play a key part in climate policies. So have you released some specific recommendations concerning political initiatives? You say that even the less privileged, who would benefit from taxation, inheritance taxation, are against the introduction of this tax. And when it comes to the climate transition, your study shows, and this is astonishing, that people want more the carbon tax to be dedicated to environment protection than to have them back to have this money back into their pocket. So what about possible recommendations to be made to governments in order to lead a change? We have got clear recommendations in this study. First recommendation: each climate policy is to be made by helping less privileged people for transport, for instance. That means that part of the the earnings have to be redistributed to the less privileged households. And another conclusion from these studies is that the climate threat is now clearly identified. People are convinced of it. Information is there. Is not lacking. But what is lacking, that's the availability of tools, the understanding of how these tools can operate, and this is really lacking. In fact, the understanding by people of all the tools of the instruments part is not sufficient, and I think it's could perhaps be part of a dedicated entity or institutions. It could be the part to be played by dedicated institution to take on board these issues. But of course, investment has to be made in the field of common transport, public transport, e-load, electric car load facilities, etc., etc. And we understand what you are saying. That's essential. So supporting less privileged households and conducting the right policies. Thanks very much, Stefanie. Thanks very much indeed. Sorry, but the sound wasn't very clear. Well, let me turn to you. You did the study at HEC, Higher School of Commercial and Business Studies, and you try to exert some pressure on your school so that it better includes environmental challenges. You are a former student of this school, and you are still a member of this group, Alumni Transition. And you did set up this observatory of environmental opinions. And one of the first conclusions you have is that instead of asking concrete questions far too vague, is it essential to save our planet, you preferred to conduct a survey to assess all the statements, the prevailing statements, opinions, which kind of interfere with the actual challenges, which distort them. And you listed 31 questions dealing with these assertions, and you realize that they are widely supported. Please do tell us the top 5 questions, top 5 issues which act as blocking agents, so to speak, vis-a-vis climate transition. We did set up this observatory 1 year ago, and we aim at acting against the tide, so to speak, and testifying to the social consensus and assessing the prevailing consensus, so-called consensus. But and we realized that when we we started tackling very concrete actions or arguments, things are altogether different. So some arguments we call a punchline are reiterated all over again. So the issue is population in Africa. France is just 1% of emissions. Ecology is anti-humanistic, etc., etc. And so beyond trying to understand why people are committed to ecology, we found it might be interesting to understand why they were rather inactive, not taking action, not embarking in actions. I give you some examples in a minute, and we also try to look into the reasons which could account for the fact that some policies are not favored by the public, by citizens. Well, let me just tackle the first issue. That's climatic denial. One citizen in three doesn't trust climate experts. So these people, of course, cannot support the policies which are introduced. Next, 1/4 of French citizens think that climate change doesn't threaten our societies. This opinion is not shared by all the strata of the French population. So we have to fight against this. Otherwise, once more, you become totally inactive. We also realized and found out what we call the anthropological fatalism. What does it mean? Or doom, we would say. That is, it's part of human nature not to be able to deal with climate hazards, and that it's impossible to have reliable climate policies. And this argument is supported by over 70% of the French population. Once you are convinced of this, what are you going to change? Nothing, because you can't change anything, things you cannot change human nature. And I must say that things are different with younger generations. We often hear that we're reaching the youngster think that we're reaching the end of the world. We often hear that the youngsters are panicking, but far from it. We have no climate generation. Youngsters do not think differently. There is no climate generation. And But young generations support less all these arguments I have mentioned, and which can only lead to inactivity. Now, if the issue comes from consumption in the US, in China, if we're only accountable for 1% emission, where are we going to head for? I mean, nothing is going to work out. So we also wanted to study this phenomenon of people living in well-off districts, bourgeois people who don't understand a thing about environment. Well, 43% do think, 43% of the French do think it's true. And if we look at things from an income viewpoint, by looking at the income distribution, we observe that income doesn't play any much part in this argument. We have about the same results. What makes a difference is ideology. And one of the fundamental arguments is denial, optimism, and anthropological kind of obstacle. Excuse me. And we did also test whether ecology was considered as something anti-progress against humanism. And let's say that this argument is supported by the right and far right end of the political spectrum. And this kind of rejection of ecology as an issue is an issue in itself, which leads me to conclude that today's ecology is not at all a consensus, and which may not be a problem if it's a political. It may be a political issue, but anyway, the vision of ecology, the approach of ecology may change as everything can change around us, political trends, etc. But the thing is, we have reached a stage which differs now. That is to say, taking steps, introducing new actions, clearly insisting on the need for introducing new measures. And that's, in a nutshell, the summary of our report. I invite you to read it, to discuss it further. And we still have many surveys to conduct in the near future. Support to ecological movements, to more or less radical ecological movements, which are still rejected by some fraction of the society. Surveys on the fact of reverse trend, shifting from growth to non-growth. And what about green growth? We may have to conduct further surveys to better understand all this. Thanks very much for sharing this approach, which what you did is highly realistic, since you go beyond the consensus to look at the obstacles, the current obstacle. If I understand well, ecology will is and will be a battle. It can also progress, but more gently, let's say. And I turn to you, Marion, because you are presiding over a think tank set up in the 70s by Antoine Ribou at Danone and François Dalle at L'Oréal, and a think tank entitled Entreprise Et Progrès, Companies and Progress. is based on the fact that businesses can play a citizen's part, not only business and money-making part, and you also focus on the issue of environmental transition, which of course is based on business investments to some extent. And you also state that most French citizens think that businesses should entice their workers, their salaried workers, their workforce, to vote. And you issued some recommendations to create a link based on trust at society level.
Effectivement, on a eu envie de faire un sondage avant.
Yeah, we wanted to organize this before the election to try and understand whether the employees of the group are expected to vote. Why is it? Because at the time of the Middle East conflict, we realized that the geopolitical conflict and the war in the Ukraine was discussed within the company. So we started wondering whether politics is going to be part and parcel of a daily thinking of company members. 6 French people out of 10 said that he expects his CEO to organize debate and make it possible to decide on the issue of voting, company or corporate voting. I suppose the figure, the ratio is still higher today. Does it show that companies are becoming more and more political? No. They're becoming a factor to take on board when it comes to making decisions. You know, the CEO is supposed to take a stand on societal issues. On the voting issue, French people don't say, let's discuss the content. Let's take a stand. This is not what they say. They're referring to the fact that one should go out and vote. I suppose it's trying to control abstention, which is rampant. That explains why they're taking this stand. So we like to discuss what we call the link. How can trust be created by the link? Sometimes the lack of links in society, at least sometimes in companies, there is very little few strong links that would like to act in favor of a social reconciliation, people getting together, in other words, for that to work on the brotherly company. It's an oxymoron. We want to explore this because the topic of brothership in corporate world doesn't make much sense. It doesn't apply to the corporate environment. But it was useful because we reached a conclusion. We organized many working groups on this, that it is possible to have a tripod about brotherly, a more altruistic company, more political and more open. If there's more brotherly feeling, then it can really try to see to it that company members behave in a more brotherly way. So, in concrete terms, paying your suppliers quicker. An altruistic company doesn't have to wait until the last day for paying. I have enough money, I'll pay at 30 days rather than 60 or even 90. That's the first idea. Also, kind of a referenda, going further, organizing kind of referendums, public voting on ideas, the validity of the new ideas. So this is on brotherhood. Then how can we improve? There are so many vulnerable issues solitude. WHO had decided that solitude would become a worse epidemic than COVID. It's a global epidemic. Real estate is another one. How can I try to co-workers, fellow workers? 1 point helps collaborators, employees find a home. So you have a single-parent family, AXA, AXA vulnerability to find the right models for provided services for single-parent families, new vulnerabilities, the way in which we work on so brotherly. It's not a label, just like BICO. It's rather a philosophy, a different approach, and you provide guidelines on profit sharing, decent salaries, but it's not a label. No, it's not a label. We have a label, but we encourage labels. We label washing. What do you make of it? I don't know what to make of it. I think it's a progress. If you work on the BICOP stratification, a corporate company with a mission, as we like to call it, we work on the DNA, the identity of the company, so it's relevant, but you have to go further. What are we seeing? We're seeing that you said in your introduction there's lots of mistrust or distrust in the country. Corporations are perceived as something to be trusted, where in the past the boss had a bad image. This is not the case anymore. I suppose that different labels have supported this change of attitude. Now, companies have opened their doors, or the companies, their groups. Now you have to accept it. Stakeholders think that they are invited in companies as they step into the general assemblies. This is what we saw with the Amundi. They like to challenge the reports that they took a part in. This is what happened at the Garlin. And all scientists criticize the corporates in enterprise. Start that. Okay, so doors are wide open, and stakeholders are taking a stand. And my recommendation is let's go further. This was okay. We've opened up the road to transparency. That implies dialogues. Many companies got the message. It's not just setting up new committees, creating committees. I could mention a number of initiatives at ADP. They've organized next to the airport a place where it's a neighborly dialogues, so that the local population express their views and misgivings about the noise coming from the airport. It's really a step towards more progress. So many similar initiatives, but they have to go beyond more transparency and committee meetings. Thank you, Marion. This is a very good transition to Sylvain Rabuel. Sylvain Rabuel. So the idea that reorganizing a sector which was faced to very severe crisis with the publication of Enos Castanet's book that started a scandal about Orpea that had to change the name. So it's going to be a pretty difficult storm to go through. I suppose that all the families in EHPADs, old age houses and homes, were wondering about the well-being of their elderly, or their senior members. They had to regain the confidence of the community. How did you achieve it? Well, I'll try to contribute my own story, or the story of my company. what are you supposed to do when you see that there's no trust anymore? If you are a respectable company that does its job and does it well, and we haven't asked anything to anyone in my area, I mean, caring, providing services to elderly people, this is a triple crisis, existential crisis in the context of the COVID epidemics, and this is the most violent crisis we had to go through because COVID was a very threatening virus, particularly for elderly people, and triggered a lack of confidence. Public authority didn't trust in our services that we provided. Then we had to go through a bad name. We had a bad name, and then it got worse because there was a lot of inflation, and this so-called services industry has difficulty setting the prices. We have a series of violent crises. Domusvi was not asking for anything, was being able to protect as well as much as we could the elderly people who were in our charge, as well as the health of our employees. Obope is a different system, and then we had to face the economic crisis. And then the main feature of this confidence crisis is you haven't asked anything from me, and yes, you're pushed into that stream, even though you do your job and you do it well. You're faced with this lack of trust, lack of confidence. My teams, shareholders, wondered about what we were supposed to make of this crisis. And one of the main conclusions is that, in fact, families and who are far more than just clients, customers, they're people who want us to help their close relatives. So we don't call them clients or customers. They were not familiar with what we do. They were not acquainted with our profession. They did not relate or understand the magnitude of the investment we have to make to do our job and do them well. And this is our problem, because these jobs were built or created by setting aside stakeholders. These are jobs or professions that developed outside of families. Trust is not something they can decide. So we thought it would be good to put the families at the core of Domusvi by creating a national council of families in one of the countries that we have establishment in. So there was a call to volunteers to give you money. We host 30,000 elderly people per day. So we interact with that large number of families, and we call on volunteers. We wanted them to be part of this council. They become members of the family members and dedicate a number of hours per month to help us work at this council. So there was a drawing of lots. The family council was established a year ago in France, and every single year they get together to do two things. Number one, generate a recommendation to improve the quality of life at Domusvi. They meet in committees and suggest improvements. And the second thing they do is they supervise what Domusvi does. In other words, they have access to all the satisfaction surveys. They have access to all complaints that we get. Sometimes, families are not totally happy, and it's only normal. So they have access to all the mails and the letters we get. And they can decide that they would eventually tackle a particular family, a particular topic. They have their own budget. They are voluntary. They don't get paid for that, but they have an operating a fund to help them operate the system. So in the future, once the council is mature, probably 2, 3, 4 years from now, we'll go for a governance of companies and their families. So the employees are represented in the body that represents the company, but families are not. They are not formally involved. And with the National Council of Families, we've laid the first stone of this representation. I'm convinced that in the longer run, we will invite in our supervisory board, that is next to the managing team and shareholders, 1 or 2 representatives of the Family Council who will sit within us and take part in the decision-making process. So this is the initiative that we are taking. This is being deployed in other countries where we are present. Thank you very much. We don't have much time for discussion, but I think that there's one question on the extremes. What about the extremes? Are they against ecology? I'll let you answer this because you've organized this. Yeah, we did only one investigation, but we see there's a real polarization of focusing. You're looking, of course, extremists. That's political extremism. For instance, if you compare the trust that we put on climate experts, I look at the figures, agreement, general agreement, 60%, 30% do not trust climate experts. In other words, 70% do. 38% of the Le Pen voters place their trust in the climate experts. 38 for the Le Pen voters, 30% for the Zemmour. It's above 45% for the Jadot voters. 88% for the Mélenchon voters. So there is indeed a polarization. Do we trust the climate experts? And sometimes there are huge gaps between the radical or the extremes of these two blocs, the left wing with they approve and they reject this in the Zemmour voters, extremes. So extreme polarization, and we'll come back for the second part of our investigation. Stefanie, since you're conducting a number of international studies, do you see a link between the trust that people have on would you trust a known person, or do you think that you have to be more careful, or could you have confidence, or are you trusting them, and the extreme voters? I haven't worked on this. I know there is research going on, but I, for one, haven't seen this thing about the link between trust and parties. And there is a link as well on the vision of the world and the party. It has to do with the platforms that tend to see the world with a number of conflicts between the wealthiest of the population and the less affluent. It's something which is indeed shown by your research. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for that, but we have to leave it at that. Now I give the floor Cyril Batolo, COP3 student, who will come to on the podium. The student COP is for students. The latest one was in Angers. How do younger generations, how are they getting organized? How do they put their act together?